Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Gary Cohen to talk about the intersection of product discovery, product delivery, Gen AI, and benefits of style of different practices, for example, mobbing, and bootstrapping, pairing, and mobbing. But first, Gary, if you'd like, can you give us an introduction?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm Gary Cohen, and I'm based outside of Philadelphia. I have a long history of software development. I used to run engineering and product groups for software product companies around the Philadelphia area. A few years ago, I kind of transitioned into independent consulting. I help organizations with they basically transforming change, things like that, whether that be agile, whether it be product thinking, anything like that. I've worked with some big tech companies, I've worked with startups, I've worked with mid-sized companies, and I've even worked with like some state agencies. So all over the place there, they're all very different.
Nice. Nice. Right on. Yeah. Well, I mean, given that wide variety of different contexts and environments and organizations and companies, yeah, what comes to mind for you for the intersection of discovery and delivery for products?
Yeah, so I've actually been doing a lot of thinking and talking and writing about this lately. Hanging out with folks in the agile world, we tend to focus on the delivery side, right? And that's also true, like if we're engineering managers and things like that. But so we worry a lot about efficiency and flow and things like that there. But but there's also this stat out there that like 80% of the features that we put into our products are never or rarely used by our customers. And like that's so glaringly bad, right? And inefficient is, so it's like, hey, why don't we spend some more time on that side as well? And the other thing is kind of, I think, with wanting to get better at that, and then also with Gen AI potentially making it easier to put software out there, right? Well, I'm not saying it's good or bad software, but putting more software out there, right? It kind of raises the bar in terms of what customers will expect in terms of match and functionality and things like that. So I think I kind of see product discovery becoming more continuous and more important, and also kind of intertwining with our delivery efforts. So that's kind of why I threw that out there.
Do you see the do you see the aspect, so like we follow the 80/20 rule a lot of the time, especially around, build the 20% of the product that most of the customers will use, that 80% of the customers will use, that sort of thing. So balancing that. And then, I think that maybe in some lean circles there's more of a focus on that. How do you go about choosing which 20% to do, and what is, how does that align with the product delivery side of things? Or maybe it doesn't align, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. So traditionally, right, even in your enlightened organizations, right, you do some product discovery, you talk to actual customers, you have UX folks, right? You do all that stuff and you say, okay, this is the thing we want to build. And then we go about building it iteratively or whatever. But essentially we don't deviate a whole lot from this is what we're going to build, right? And I think
Right.
that's what gets us in trouble, right? That's why we're only 20% successful in building the right stuff. So I think what I've seen, and Teresa Torres talks a lot about this, is continuous discovery habits, and um, really keeping multiple possible solutions in mind with the outcome you're trying to achieve, and really staying in the customer problem space, right? And understanding the jobs to be done, and not just make it a separate effort that product folks do or UX folks do, right? But engineers and everybody on the delivery side really needs to be involved in that. In some, I shouldn't say everybody, but certainly at least some people need to be. And, if you understand that, then you can sort of experiment, and test out things without building a whole big backlog of things, and then get feedback, and then maybe you can pivot if you need to.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I like that term you said, continuous discovery. And I think um, maybe I'm trying to compare that to maybe some of your other experiences or something you're hinting at. So in your mind, do you see it as like, even if you do quote unquote agile and lean practices of, let's say there's 100 feature ideas, and you might do those in an iterative fashion, thin slice feature one, thin slice feature two, thin slice feature three, if I can speak. Uh, and are you saying that you've seen the experience where you've had the experience where people will, after delivering slices 1, 2, and 3, will continue to deliver 4 through 100 because that was the plan, versus responding to feedback? Is that the kind of thing you're getting at? Is that they just continue on with this basically like a giant waterfall plan, but they just deliver it iteratively?
I mean, I've seen that, right?
Okay.
That's not, but that's not,
Mhm.
I would say that would be a below average,
Okay.
sort of
Yeah.
environment. But even in the ones that are more enlightened, it's like, okay, we may think that there's 20 things we need to do for this. I'll call it an
Mhm.
epic, for lack of a better word, right? Or feature,
Yeah.
right? And you learn, you get feedback, and you're like, okay, well, we really only need to do 10, or we don't really only need to do 5, right? And now we'll move on to the next thing. But
Right.
we publish these roadmaps, right? And whether they're internally published or externally published, I mean, obviously there's a difference there, but even on internally published roadmaps, in a lot of organizations, that's almost like chiseling them into stone, right?
Mm.
And so yeah, we're getting better at, okay, we don't have to build all of this, right? But it's still like, if we put that on the roadmap, then in 6 months, that's what we're going to be focused on, rather than saying, hey, you know what? People aren't using this very much,
Yeah. Okay.
right? Maybe we need to go circle back.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah, killing a feature is as important as creating one, because that fee maintenance of that feature can, still costs money ongoing, especially in internet connected environments where there could be hacking and or software updates. So a little bit of this is maybe even a look back of, are people actually using this? And if it's a subset of people that's pretty much not using it, then how do we go about, removing it from the product offering?
Mm.
That's one of the
Mm.
hardest things to do too. I see a lot of like product managers and product owners struggle with this idea of, well, now the user has it, so we have to maintain it forever. And I very rarely see somebody saying, yeah, let's just get rid of that because it's not, it's only valuable to a few people. Well, those few people might complain a whole lot. They might be louder than all your other users. So,
Yes, exactly. And yes, and the worst case is not that nobody uses it, it's that like 3 or 4 people
right.
use it, right?
Mm.
Yeah, and that's right, that's one big problem, right? So you have to upkeep it, right? Number two, right, your code base, now is a little bit more restricted and constrained, right? Which slows your velocity down of adding new stuff. And then number three, if this stuff is cluttering your user interface, then it makes your software more complex from a customer user perspective. So it's really bad that we miss on this 80% of the time.
Yeah. 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 And I think I'm trying to, I guess, just drawing from my experiences in my context, I don't know if I've ever seen super diligent roadmap discipline, because I feel like that's maybe the problem you're talking about, right? Is where someone makes a roadmap and they stick to it regardless of the feedback. I feel like most environments I've been in, even if they do declare roadmap discipline, or like we have a plan and we're going to stick to it and we're going to build these 20 features, that almost never happens.
Uh,
Where they just change their mind anyway. So it's like most of the common experiences I have is we want to do these 20 things, and then we whittle it down to here are the top 1, 2, or 3. Let's build one of them. And after we build the first or second or third one, they say, okay, this is great. This is delivering value. Or it's like, oh, it's getting moderate success. Let's not invest any more in this. Some people are using it, but not, and then they pivot. Or some new big thing comes along and then their plan for items 4 through 20 just go out the window and something else comes up, right? I guess I'm trying to think of a case where, you know, something doesn't pop up where they really want to go back and finish these other roadmap items. I don't know, Chris, have you seen this?
Oh yeah, I certainly
Okay.
have. So
Okay. Yeah.
I've been in situations where we were iterating, very lean, very agile, iterating toward a product owner. But unbeknownst to the team, the product owner wasn't showing it to anyone else. And so by the time they did show it to other people, those other people are like, that's absolutely not what we need. And so it was iteration in a direction, and none of it would have been used because there was no validation. So that's an extreme case. But
Okay.
I've also seen roadmap requirements get stuck to the T and then eventually abandoned. So that's I
Okay.
mean maybe that's more what you're talking about here. Um, I think that the 80/20 rule can be turned on its head in many different ways, right? So like 80% of the features are used by 20% of the users or vice versa. So depending on what the mix is. And so that the 80/20 rule book is pretty interesting because they give a lot of different examples. But you know, 20% of the application developed typically in a lot of environments that maybe aren't doing it this way are generally not used. So even if you have a strict roadmap or don't have a strict roadmap, I think what you might be saying is that we often end up with a lot of maybe excess inventory of features that aren't being used by people, even though they were asked for. And I've seen that happen often. But yeah, so how do you bridge the gap between this like focus on our Dora metrics and the product discovery? I know you said like Gen AI, so to me that sounds like making rapid prototypes to verify customer demand, or are there other things that you're getting at?
So, I mean, ideally, I think, I mentioned Teresa Torres, and one of the things that she kind of talks about is understanding what are the critical assumptions that have to be true for this feature to be useful, right? Or to give you the results that you're looking for, and to get really good at quickly testing those so that you kill the, I don't want to say bad ideas, but the ones that ultimately aren't feasible or unworkable or whatever. And by doing that, you get a lot more swings at bat, um, to find that sweet spot and the things that people are going to use, right? So it's how do you do that if all your discovery is happening up front, right? Or as a separate, hey, we're a couple iterations ahead, right? I've seen that model where, oh, we just have to feed the team or keep the backbot, right? And and that's good if you're running a factory, right? And sometimes look, sometimes exactly what you need to produce, right? And you want to be really good about
Right.
doing that. And I think that there are places, and I've been in places where we get really good at that, but it'd be even better if we were a little bit more, I think, thoughtful about how much we really don't know about what the customer wants, and be a little bit, I'm going to use the agile word, but a little bit more agile in terms of how we do discovery, and then that kind of leads you into the like how do we do that? Like, should discovery and delivery be a little bit tighter, right? A little bit closer,
Mhm.
right? And that's like one of the things where, I mean, I don't know how that would impact like a mob working together. But I know that one of the things that I saw when I was thinking about this is Quentin Cortell, he's been pushing this fluid adaptive scaling technology, which I think is pretty interesting. And one of the things I really like about it is that you can do these discovery things and these delivery things in the same tree structure, right? And in the same, within the same collective, I think is
Right.
what they call their teams. And I know they use a lot of mob programming too, although they may just use it on the delivery side. So all that to say, like, I'm not sure how, this fits together with things like mobbing and things like that, but I was kind of interested in getting your take on that.
Yeah.
Well, so for me, I think a lot of what you're saying reminds me of the Lean Startup book, and then also the white glove treatment, where you might make a couple of buttons on a UI, but then everything in the background is manual.
Yep.
And so that can certainly be an outcome of that, to eliminate those things that we don't need to do. Um, I guess as far as the fluid adaptive scaling systems, uh, when when deciding to pick up something, I think that there is a question of whether or not people have agency, whether or not developers have agency on what gets developed or not, right? So there are teams where that's very strictly defined. Um, I'm also thinking of like Fred George's Programmer Anarchy, where there is, maybe three different roles, for interaction with the customer, and often there's a lot of experimental work going on at the same time. So those are all the things that bubble up in my head when you're talking about that. Um, and so I do think that discovery is possible, and I do think that also measuring after the fact to kind of see if a bet was successful or not is super important as well.
Yeah.
And then paper prototyping, like that can be a big thing too.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree with all those.
Yeah, yeah. I think the one thing I'll just add in is the big difference I experienced after going from, let's just say, traditional waterfall or even traditional agile, where you're not working as a collective or a mob or a pair, then going to where you do, is that the idea of the mob is that the whole system is in the room, whatever's needed for all the things, ideation, product discovery, front end, back end, CI/CD, pipeline infrastructure, production monitoring. And so you're kind of involved in it all. And so you learn it all. And so as opposed to one silo knowing something and then needing to give it to designers who are designing the next thing down the roadmap, it's just like you're all there already, right? And so when we made the infrastructure as code, or when we did the delivery, automated delivery, we set up monitoring so we would know if it worked or not,
Right.
if users are using it at all, or if it's blowing up in the field, or and then there's always like you have your beta users or your first users giving you feedback and that kind of thing, where it's kind of more in person. But the big difference for me that was really cool was, wow, we made a thing, the entire thing. I just didn't make one piston in the car.
Yep.
And then we, are part of the team that delivers it and watches it get used and get feedback from that, whether that's in person or kind of metrics gathered. And then that feeds into decisions. And so usually it's kind of like turn up or turn down, like, this feature's being moderately used, maybe we go into something else, or people are loving it, turn it up, add more things to it, or or other times it was killed, kind of like what you were talking about before, where, hey, we really need to solve this problem. We put on some production metrics and some experiments, and we saw that it was a big problem, but in one way, but the statistics didn't impact that many people, and then so we just kind of abandoned it because the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, kind of thing. And so where before, I think I would just see a small piece of that and then maybe hear about things here and there. Where with a mob, and our environment operates somewhat similar to the FAST framework. And we'll put a link in the show note that kind of talks about the similarities and differences. But I could see in the FAST framework that collective would also have a similar experience, I'm guessing. So.
Yeah, it seems that way. And I like the fact that you said, hey, we have all the people that we need in the room.
Mhm.
And while I've read a lot about, mob programming, I haven't had the experience of like actually working with a group that was doing it. And so one of the things I was wondering about is like what, how much are they focused just on the delivery and DevOps side, and how much are they focused on meeting the customer needs, figuring that out, the discovery side there. So I think you
Yeah.
gave me a little bit of insight there.
Well, an interesting story from our environment is, we work with some, bigger, end customers and smaller ones as well. And so for the ones that are large enough where there may be few customers, but but have bigger needs, often we have brought power users in to write both the UI and portions of the feature with them there. And then showing them, or having them interact with that new UI, for example, there on the spot, even, before it hits production. So I think when you have like that, if you can do a one-to-one touch point on representative customers, that can be super valuable. So, we invite people in, we mob on it, we talk about, we see, watch silently as they interact with the system, and then afterwards, modify things while they're there, and then see the immediate reaction to that. And I guess the opposite end is at scale, where I think like what Austin was saying is instrumentation of analytics across a system, and saying, okay, well, out of 1,000 users, we only had one person use it, and so then um, and we work in the Internet of Things space, and so what a really cool thing that came out of that was that um, the firmware engineers that have been working on the physical product that would go out to end customers for the last 30 years have never been able to collect metrics about how the product was used before IoT. Now with IoT, it was like, oh yeah, only 5% use this thing. They're like, I knew we should have never worked on that. Or, the opposite end. It's like, wow, I can't believe that, 80% of users have actually interacted with this feature. I thought it was so esoteric. And so, yeah, I think that the whole system in the room is a really good thing. But when you can't have the whole system in the room, or you can't have a representative sample of the whole system, it does become things like the shotgun approach of like how many can we blast this out to a thousand users, and then see and certainly it's much less frequent, but there have been times where the white glove treatment has happened. So for example, if you're going to add a payment portal to a product, you might end up just making it a manual data entry thing rather than having people enter credit information to be managed directly for a time, and then exposing that only to a few customers, right? So I think there's a lot of ways to identify if a if you're violating the 80/20 rule. And I think it's a lot more natural in a mob. So when working solo, it was, I certainly had the experience where it was much more dangerous to build something that wouldn't be used. Because already you have four people, scrutinizing whether or not it's going to be used. But by the time you're at the whole system approach, say you have a product owner there, a UI UX person, and a end customer that's representative of the user base, then the iteration time becomes incredibly small. And so then you find that 20% of value very, very quickly. And then, uh, I guess another thing that came up maybe 5 or 6 years ago was just this idea of gold plating. And so anytime we would go past or violate the 80/20 rule, it would become sort of a meme of like, we're gold platers. So somebody in the team would sing the Goldfinger theme from James Bond, but gold saying gold plater. And then everybody would be like, okay, it's time to like back off of this and work on something else. So it was a pretty kind of funny thing in that way.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah, and then I think I have a follow-up question for you, Gary, which is, and thanks for asking us questions. That's always fun too. And it's fun to share some experiences. But what's kind of your go-to or things you do to help teams and organizations with their product discovery habits? Yeah.
It obviously it depends on what what stage of company they are.
Hmm.
But it's making sure, number one, that they don't build too quickly or build too much too quickly, right? Without bringing the customer in, right? Without everybody understanding the context. And Chris just mentioned the instrumentation. That's another part. But it's even more than building the instrumentation in there. Like if we want to make a bet that somebody is going to use this, or here's the reason we're investing money and time into doing this feature, right? Well, what's the behavior that we're expecting, right? And that's both in the, using the application, and then also, hey, um are you going to stick with us as a customer, right? Are you going, is this our new cost? Are we trying to attract new customers? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And you set some of those goals and metrics up front before you get to the delivery. That way you don't have any sort of confirmation bias to worry about, like when you're actually measuring it. Oh, that's, if I squint my eyes, that looks like that's okay, or it'll get better, right? And let's keep developing it, right? Which is not really what you want. So those are some things. Sometimes it's like people just don't have the customers in the room. And I know you guys were talking about, bringing them in, kind of in discovery mode, but we all, in back in my days when I was engineering and product, leadership, we would actually bring in customers every sprint review, right? And have them give us feedback. It's not always the same people. Sometimes it was, but you could tell even just by body language or things like that, like, if it's like, hey, what the heck is that? versus you see a smile. I mean, we've even had people tweet on well, it's now X, but Twitter or whatever, right? Saying,
Yeah.
like, hey, this completes me, or something like really nice like that. You know that you're hitting a positive chord there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that is a really fun moment. I've been able to participate in some of those too, where you're demonstrating in the field and the customer literally says wow, and you see that with 5 or 10 customers in a row in a day, and you're kind of like, okay, there's something here. And other times it's just kind of there's just like,
Yeah.
like you said, the body language, and then the usage statistics are low, and we're kind of like, maybe this one stays on for the brochure because, salespeople need that, but we're not going to invest anymore in this. Like
Yeah.
this isn't really, getting that behavior that we want, like the winning the customer and making their life much better kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think maybe to pivot a bit, to your next topic. In your mind, how has generative AI AI stuff impacted development practices, product discovery for you?
Um, so I mean, I've seen some places that use it, some places that shy away from it, but everything that I've seen from Gen AI, if you're an individual developer,
Hmm.
right, or an individual tester or whatever, you can see things that might be where you might be more productive because of Gen AI, whether it's autocomplete, although if the autocomplete's not good, then that's actually really bad. But things that are very repetitive, right? That you can do now in 10 seconds that used to take you, 10 minutes, 20 minutes or whatever. But that got me wondering, in terms of in a mob, right, where you already have all these eyes on things, right? Is would Gen AI, and things like Copilot, things like that, would that be helpful? Would it be a distraction? And like, would you treat it like another mob member, or what, kind of, would it have an obvious lift there in productivity? And I'm just curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I have
Go
some
ahead,
experiences,
Austin.
but I'll kick it to Chris first.
Oh
Right on.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you're the one that has been doing it firsthand, so maybe I'll leave it to you. I have ideas, but they're more of implementation details than anything else. But Austin's been doing more mobbing with a AI member.
Yeah, I think on technical front, we do treat it as at least in my mobs for the last couple years, thanks to some team members who have teach me how to interact with these AI chat systems or integrations into the IDE and such. And so, yeah, we basically do treat it as another member of the team. There are kind of introverted versions of it where you ask it a question, or there are extroverted versions where it'll interject itself in the middle of you doing the work and with ideas. For example, like a code IDE, autocomplete kind of thing. And so the most use cases I have for it is more tech, where we're basically saying like, hey, we are trying to do X, Y, and Z for this outcome, and it is product related because we're trying to, we'll talk with it about what we're trying to achieve, what business value we're trying to achieve, and so we'll brainstorm on ways to accomplish that, and then it'll help us link lots of things together, like, oh, you're using this technology with this system, maybe that you go with this architecture or this integration or that kind of thing, or here's a code sample that's 80% right and 20% wrong, but at least gets the experimentation going. And then we'll on our own, and we'll also ask it to clean up the code and then make it production ready and add monitoring and all the kind of things you were talking about before. We also have used it for product discovery too, where we were saying like, hey, this stakeholder or customer said this. Is this really true in the industry, right? Like, would, they're saying this kind of data. The example that comes to mind for me was if customer type X, Y, and Z had data A, for example, sales would go up, right? And that kind of thing. And so we would use it to ask those kind of questions, and we can confirm things and, disconfirm certain things. And so it kind of helped in product discovery in that way too, for learning industries. And even though we're learning domain as we go, for when you work in technology that's serving, Internet of Things type customer, there are a lot of things we don't know. And so sometimes it's industry knowledge is good to ask, and it informs either technology choices or experiment choices for which thin slice to do next. So that was kind of a long-winded answer there, but some recent
Well,
things.
yeah, well, I really like the terms introverted and extroverted. That's pretty cool and pretty descriptive. And it seems like you actually talked about using it as to help you with domain expertise, which I
Mhm.
think like if you're starting off at a fairly low level of knowledge, like it can get you kind of to the average
Mhm.
level there, which might be a big benefit. But I've also seen it where especially in areas that I know about where it just flubs things, right? And so I guess you just have to be careful of like I like to use it like for brainstorming sort of things. So
Yeah.
right. And but yeah, no, it's quite an interesting world that we live in with this new tool that we're figuring out how to use or not use, as the case may be.
Yeah, I think about iterative loops, right? Like how fast an iteration happens. And so, often when a mob does something, it together, there's a lot that goes into it, right? Everybody is focused on the same thing and criticizing, and so comes out very refined. And then there's like unrefined inquiry, and so which is like kind of the opposite. And unrefined inquiry, I think, is like a mob member doing a quick Google search on the side and not bothering everybody with it, so that they can confirm their ideation. And so there is this, I think, an idea of uh, the mob putting in a chat GPT query or a Copilot prompt in the comments or something, versus like iterating on the side. And so if I'm in a mob and I'm trying to figure something out quickly, there are like certain features. So the latest versions of ChatGPT will automatically run unit tests inside the prompt and then give you the test result before and so you can certainly do a lot of unrefined iteration. And since the responses are kind of slow, especially when it's running code on its own, you can do that iteration on the side. So I'd almost think of it as not only the big feedback loop with the mob creating prompts together and prompt engineering versus this like less engineering and more like the art of prompting happening off to the side. So if you have a mob of four people and they each are interacting with an AI themselves, but then also together interacting with like a AI that they're focusing on together, then I think that's probably likely to be one of the better scenarios, so that more trivial questions can and prompting can happen quickly and in parallel versus and then eventually merging that into the like final product. Um, and I guess the other thing I'll say is like for teams that do things sort of somewhat repetitively or like one thing is that Copilot looking at your commit that you're about to make and then writing your commit message and refining those things can be good. So just like as an automation tool, it can be really good around just plain text entry, sort of stuff. So those are some of the things that kind of bubble up in my mind when you ask about that.
Neat.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I really like what you said, Chris, about refined versus unrefined AI inquiry, because yeah, you can't just take it. You got to check
Right.
it with the domain experts in your company and
Right.
with experiments on the technology. Um, and one thing I thought I would share that is interesting, because we started this episode talking about the problem of sticking to a plan even when the data is saying don't, right?
Yeah.
I have seen it help in that regard, and it actually was kind of controversial in that um, Chris and I have talked about this. Sometimes uh, customers, stakeholders have pork barrel spending with product ideas, right? Where it's kind of like there's one idea that, let's say, is going to generate millions, right? But then there'll be like features that kind of get lumped into the same thing, right? And so interacting with AI did help one team I was on discover that of the 20 things they asked for, there was one thing that is like the black swan that they talk about in economics, where this is the thing that is going to generate a ton of value. And so we highly optimized to working on that first. It was controversial in the organization because I don't know if all the stakeholders agreed, but it did turn out to be true experimentally. We did release that one thing, and it did provide a ton of value without releasing, like I think in their mind, they wanted it to be coupled with these 19 other things, right, in their roadmap, right? And so we figured out a way to only deliver the one thing. And so there were pros and cons to that. And but AI was a part of that discovery and motivation for us, because we were like, wow, this really is going to be super beneficial, and we don't need these other 19 things. So
Right. No, that's cool that you're able to do that. I guess I would always worry, like, did it just get lucky, or like, is it really onto something? I
yeah,
guess it depends, right?
right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, you still need the human observer in the process, and that's a big problem with generative AI now is that it's the statistics can get better, but we've reached the point of diminishing returns on the input because it was trained mostly off of data off the internet, and now the data off the internet is mostly generated by AI, and so the quality of incoming data is only going to degrade going forward. And so, unless the statistics become somehow perfect, right? Which they can't, they're like fundamentally fuzzy. So, these generative models are going to have to be heavily curated for human created data going in to then continue to be usable as a tool. And so that's the only thing is that the vendors of these tools need to be on top of keeping the quality of the results up and not get lured into the temptation of using prompt generated things as training data.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. 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 Yeah. And sometimes we'll teach it, say like, hey, you were wrong on this. What do you think about that? Oh, I'm so sorry. Here's the correction.
Yeah, I've done that. I actually posted something to LinkedIn where I asked it actually a baseball related question, and it flubbed. It put in a false positive and a false negative, and so then I was kind of snarky, and I just like would ask it questions, about like who won the World Series last year. Oh, and it would say, oh yeah, the Texas Rangers, which was on its list of teams that never won the World Series.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you now want to, would you like to revisit your first answer? And it's like, oh yes, I should revise my answer. Well, so yes, it's funny how it
Yep.
handles that.
Yep. 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 Yeah, I have to say that in the middle of coaching youth baseball, when there's a controversial call, looking through the 1,000-page MLB and youth baseball document is very slow, but asking ChatGPT has been beneficial.
There you go. Hey.
Yeah, I mean, like,
So,
yeah.
we're getting close to time here, but maybe we can jump in a little bit to bootstrapping, pair and mob programming. What did
Yes.
you have? What were you thinking there?
Yeah, so I've definitely seen how pair programming, like if you're in an environment where people haven't done it and then somebody tries to introduce it. And, I've been in environments where that works, like where they do it very selectively for certain circumstances and certain people. I've seen environments where that's all they do is pair programming, right? And there's lots of good things about that. But like I'm looking at it from an organizational standpoint. Like a lot of times you'll get resistance to some of these things, and sometimes it comes from the developers, right? Sometimes it comes from management because like, well, wait, am I getting half as much or am I, and I'm sure with mob programming it's even worse than that. And like I've been, one of my clients who is a place where you wouldn't think that this is an issue, but like sometimes in big tech, like their reward system, right, and their promotions are very tied to individual attribution of your work, right? How can we know that what role you played in delivering this great thing or whatever? And so clearly, like I know people who wanted to do pair programming, but said I won't bring it up because that's just not the culture. And so I'm just curious, like whether it's more of the same or different with mob programming, because now you're talking about even more people involved and even more coordination.
Yeah.
I have a lot of opinions there. Maybe I should jump
No,
in.
go. Please go, Chris.
Yeah,
This is
well, it's funny because I was talking to somebody today about that because they someone on our team went to a conference and then got the same question and wanted to discuss it a little bit. Um, so I think that sometimes individual attribution can certainly damage a team's productivity overall, right? So I've certainly been in environments where that was the case. The entire bonus pool goes to one developer because they did really well and everybody else gets nothing. And it's like, now what does that do to their team's productivity? I think the same goes for sports, right? So if you have the person that's not passing the ball in whatever that sport's called, then the team will not do as well. So, I'm being a little cheeky there. But so there's that. But I mean, if you drive the incentives to be team based, right? So like rather than saying, oh, the manager should be deciding the promotions. Like make the team responsible for deciding the promotions instead, right? If you're going to divide up a like merit increase pool, then why not crowdsource that information? Because I think people will be like, yes, this person was super valuable to the team together. And so there are options for democratizing the distribution of those things, right? Yeah, you look like you're going to say something.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you, right? And like from an org design perspective, right, you want to
Right,
tweak the incentives and the processes, right, to align with the behaviors that you want. But that assumes that that is the behavior that you want. And a lot of times you have both individual developers who maybe don't want to work that way,
right,
and sometimes just as importantly, you have management, which is like, why do we want everybody working on the, same thing, right? And so I'm just kind of curious as to like, have you been able, well, I know like in your current environment, you obviously were successful at doing this,
right.
but I just like experience wise, like what are things that you can try to do to change people to get the space, I guess, to experiment to do this.
Yeah. Well, so I think it's more about influence, right? Because the organization does need to want to do any of these things. And so part of it is trying to figure out how to appeal to people. And so, I really like Linda Rising's talk on the bonobos. It was a really interesting thing, and appealing to more of the emotional side. But I also think that there is there are certain books like Switch and Power of Habit that specifically chapter 8 in Power of Habit. And those are on like influencing organizations. But if you wanted to like look at it from like a systems thinking perspective, one thing I would, point out to people is that like anyone's environment today can probably likely be modeled in causal loop diagrams. And so I've been talking a lot about this year in a couple of conference talks and stuff. But um, the one really cool outcome of doing that is you might be able to see like, hey, if we had a higher quality delivery of faster delivery of high quality upfront, um, you would see, the side effects of Deming's Out of Crisis book, right? So he talks a lot about building quality in upfront and in the manufacturing space. And then I guess the other thing I would say is just knowing your audience. So, I happen to work in a manufacturing environment. So using examples from Deming's teachings is really easy and Lean Six Sigma and all these other things. Um, some people in companies that are more traditionally software first and not manufacturing may have a harder time doing that. And so, what I recommend is, find the analogs and the analogies in the industry. In the past, I've had a boss who, used to work in bridge building. And so when I was trying to talk about, why we don't estimate our software products, one of the things I said is that, imagine trying to build a bridge, but, you receive a software update and the laws of physics change. Right. And so now you have to redo all of your diagrams and adapt to those new scenarios. It's not something that's repeatable, and you cannot rely on the base laws of physics. But so having good analogies, and then if you don't have a good relationship with the person you're trying to influence, Esther Derby and Don Gray had a lot of great content on kind of like second order influencing or influencing. If you have a friend that is a friend of the person that you don't have a good relationship with, influencing that friend can also help because they'll have that conversation later without you. All of those things can lead to a strong position in organizational influence.
Cool. I'm going to end this conversation in an awkward state because it feels like we're in the middle of some juicy stuff, and I'd love to hear more what Gary has to say on this. But we are at time, so I'm going to have to be the bad guy here. But maybe that's good because we left the conversation half done. We'd love to hear from you, audience, and your thoughts on these kinds of things. But before we close the episode, Gary, is there any final thought or anything you'd like to share or plug before we close?
Just that I love talking about these topics, and if people want to reach out to me and talk about some of these things, then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and you can find me there. And also have a website where I blog about things like this and other stuff, and that's practical-agility.com. And yeah, and I really enjoyed this conversation and really you know, appreciate the whole discussion we had.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Gary, for being on the show. Oh, were you going to say something, Chris? Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for being on the show, Gary. We really enjoyed this conversation. It actually stretched my mind to areas that I haven't explored very deeply. So it is very good for me, and I really appreciate the learning, and I know our audience will as well. So thanks for joining us. And to our audience, please like, subscribe. Please share your comments. Please, we'd love to hear your opinions on the intersection of product discovery and delivery. Different impacts from AI in product discovery and in delivery, and your thoughts on how to bootstrap different ways of working, more collective styles of working, and so and influencing up. So until next time, mob on and have a good one, everybody. See you later.